Welcome to another video by Tech and Swords. My name is Marcus Fernstrom, and today we're going to talk about Lazarus IDE build modes, and I'm going to show you how I test cross-platform applications using a VirtualBox virtual machine. Now before we get to that, I'm going to modify this IDE a little bit. So this is the end product of the last video where we set up FreePascal and Lazarus using the FPC Up Deluxe installer. So I'm not a huge fan of the layout of this IDE, where everything is kind of off on its own. So let's go to package, install uninstall packages, and I'm going to install one called Anchor Docking Design. So just highlight it, click install selection, save and rebuild IDE, and continue. This usually takes about 10 to 30 seconds. So now it needs to restart Lazarus, and it is asking if you want to save the project file, but this is just a default blank project, so no. And here we go. So this is what it looks like with Anchor Docking Design installed. Now everything here is drag and droppable. You can also undock it if you prefer that. But I like mine docked, so like so. Let's talk about build modes. A build mode is a collection of settings in your project. The most common use is to have a debug mode and a release mode, where a debug mode is set up to use a debugging tool like GDB, and a release mode is set up to not use any debugger. It's usually also got settings for optimizations turned on and that kind of thing. Now we're also going to create cross-compilation modes. So we're going to have a debug mode for Windows 64 because that's this machine. We're going to have a release mode for Windows 64. We're also going to have a release mode for Linux 64-bit. And then I'm going to show you how to actually test that in a real Linux VM. In the Lazarus IDE, you can change build modes by this little cog symbol here. If you click the arrow, you can see all the build modes we have, which in this case is just the default. So to create build modes, go ahead and click the icon. And here you have part of the project settings. Project settings we care about for build modes. Everything here, path, config, parsing, compilation, all of these settings are connected with the build mode. And that's what makes it so powerful. The first thing we want to change is the target file name under paths. And that's because this is where the application is actually compiled to. So to make it easy to keep track of what's where, when you have debug, release, you have multiple platforms, let's use a little naming convention. I like to use bin for binary. And then I like to separate it into least operating systems. This is going to be replaced with the operating system we're currently building for in the build mode. So this will be Win64 or Linux or Darwin, for example, for Mac. Now these are all 64-bit that I'm building for, but if you have more targets, you can also select target CPU. Like so. Project 1, let's call you test. Now because this apply conventions is selected, for a Windows machine it's going to automatically add the .exe. For a Linux it's going to skip it. Now the default includes settings for compilation and linking. You have optimization levels, quick and debugger friendly. We also have the debugging tab, which is set to generate info for the debugger, which makes your application slower and increases the executable size, which is perfectly fine. This is going to be our debug mode. Let's create the Windows release mode first. So go up here next to build modes default and click the 3 periods. And we're not going to click this button because we're going to manually create several modes. So first, let's rename this by double clicking, and I'm just going to call you debug. Click the plus to create a new mode, and this is going to be the Windows x64 release mode. I'm going to create one more. And this is going to be the Linux 64-bit release mode. And you can see the check mark, it's set to Linux x64 release. So now when we hit OK, that's the one we're changing settings for. And because they're separate, it makes it easy to do this. So if we go to compilation and linking, let's turn up optimizations. Let's turn off debugging information. And most importantly, config and target. So this is where you actually set up what you're targeting. So target operating system, let's scroll down and set you to Linux, and target CPU is going to be x86_64. That's a standard 64-bit. And you can leave the target processor as default, there's only the one setting. Now, let's make sure we change this for Windows while we're at it. Click here to change it. Let's say change you to Windows 64. And target OS. Scroll down and we should have Win64. Target CPU family. Same thing here, x86_64. And compilation and linking. Set you to 02. And turn off debugging. Like I said, these settings are all separate. So if you go to debug, you can see the debugging setting is checked. It is not checked for releases. So that's how easy it is to create the release setting now. Let's hit OK. And now if we check here, we have all these releases. Creating multiple releases can be a bit of a pain when you're actually building everything. So right click in the toolbar, click options, click on the bottom one, click on configure, and in the available commands filter, type many. Compile many modes. Click the right hand arrow, select it on the right hand side, and I like to move this up. I've already done this once, so you can just remove that. Hit OK, and you end up with this. 2 cogs. If you click that, you see all the available build modes. To make both releases at once, just check both of the boxes and click OK, and we're going to use that soon. So let's create a little application here. Let's add a button, and when you click it, want it to be show message, hello world. Well, let's go ahead and save our project. Go to project, save project as, and now I'm going to save you here. I'm just going to leave it as project 1. You can name it whatever you want. Let's save the unit 1 as well. So now, because we've set up those modes, we have that set to, let's set it to debug. And you can do project run build. And you can see it's now built it into bin win64 x86_64 and project 1.exe. Now if we change the build mode to Linux, build again, and now you can see that it built the compile project, mode Linux x64 release, the OS is Linux, the target is bin Linux x86-64, and project 1, and it was successfully compiled. So if you look at the folder, you get this. So this is the standard project files. Under bin, we have 2 subfolders. Windows 64, we run that, get our pop-up. And for Linux, we just have project 1. That's how easy it is to create a build mode and to actually build for multiple platforms. So let's just show you this real quick, to compile many modes. Check both boxes and hit OK, and now it's just going to compile them one after another. And when it's done, you get select 2 modes were successfully compiled. And there you have it. Let's take a look at how I like to test the cross-compiled version of this in a Linux virtual machine. I have a Ubuntu MATE virtual machine. It's box standard, except it's set up for VirtualBox. And the important thing to note here is under devices, I have drag and drop set to host to guest. So now, if we just take our little application and I drag and drop it onto the desktop of the Linux machine, see it pop up. It's now been copied into the VM. Can't run it yet though. If we double click it, we get this. Could not display, blah blah blah. Do you want to search for an application to open this file? No. What we need to do is click menu, run terminal, and it's on the desktop, and here chmod +x and the project file name. What that does is it's turning it into an executable. Now we should be able to just double click it, and here's our hello world message. And there you have it. That's how easy it is to create multiple build modes and to actually test your cross-compiled Linux executable on a Linux virtual machine. Good luck! If you like my videos, articles, open source libraries, and so on, please feel free to check me out on Patreon. Anything and everything is appreciated. Thank you.